What's up, bankers?
Hello then, guys.
How is everybody doing?
How are you doing? Are you doing okay? A couple weeks with no races, but Pierre the Red Flag is giving you all the spicy content. Yes, we have more for you today, don't we, Matthew?
Yes, we do. I cheated my way through statistics in college. It was my one math requirement, but now I'm going to pay for it and have to suffer through having a really, really interesting guest here. He is Crofty and Brundle's stat guy. He provides the statistics that you hear on your television screen. When Crofty and Brundle are just holding forth like they know everything, it's actually this guy that we have on right the fuck now. Sean
And
Kelly.
you know what? Yeah, Sean Kelly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for that very grandiose introduction. It's certainly, I always tell people, they don't really know what they're talking about. I'm the brains of the operation, without question. Yes.
That's right. That's right. And we're gonna test you.
Yeah.
Test you today.
Wait, what?
Well, we're gonna find out.
Test.
We're gonna find out. We're gonna find out how much you really know.
Wait up! I gotta call the guy who tells me the stats so I can tell them the stats. Yeah, I need him in my ear.
Who took pole in 1986 on Monza? The Monza 1986.
Teo Fabi in a Benetton BMW.
Are you fucking kidding me?
And Alain Prost was alongside, and neither of them started because Fabi. They both stalled on the parade lap.
Wait,
are you making this up? Out of here. Are you making this up?
I thought you were testing me. So there was no front row in that race because they both stalled in the formation. So first and second on the grid were empty. So third and fourth became the de facto first and second on the grid.
Wait, they stalled in the parade lap?
Yeah, I can't remember. I think
you can't remember. This guy's get this guy out of here. Let's find
somebody else.
He's
100% right.
You're Googling this right now?
Yes, I Googled it. That is, I can confirm Teo Fabi of the Benetton started in pole, Alain Prost in second, Nigel Mansell starting in third. Oh my God.
Holy shit. Who took pole in 1983? I'm kidding. But holy shit. How do you know this shit?
Well, as I always explain to people, I mean, I've done this for nearly 20 years now, professionally. So it's much the same way as if you asked, a carpenter, how do you make a table? Oh, well, I could do that blindfolded. That's easy. How do you know what materials to use and the way to set it up and everything so it'll last 100 years? Oh, well, you do it like this. It becomes second nature. You're dealing with this stuff every day. So it goes above and beyond what fandom is. It's dealing with everyday, whatever you do for your job, there are things that are completely off the top of your head where everybody else will say, how do you remember that? Because I've dealt with it 15 times. You get used to it.
I'm not as good at anything as you are at what you just did. So that was fucking crazy.
When you were in school, did you just like laugh at other people? I mean, because if I was in school with you, I would sit next to you for every single test.
Or were you dumb at other things?
What I was generally sort of earmarked as this child who could do. If he would pay attention, if he would do any work, he'd be very, very intelligent. But invariably, I would be sat there drawing pictures of Formula One cars on my book, on the cover of my exercise books and stuff like that, and which would get me into trouble. I was so into Formula One from the get-go that I was kind of distracted from proper studies. So really, it kind of had to be a career because if it wasn't, it would just have been this unhealthy obsession that distracted me from actually having a life, really. Or
you would have just been home. You would have just been homeless in Monaco, just like begging people for money, and you'd be doing you'd be doing parlor tricks, like ask me any F1 question for 5 francs or something. That would have been.
I have often said I've described my job as being. I am a guy who sits there and yells at the television when Formula One is happening. The only difference is they can hear me. That is the big difference. They can hear me and I can directly influence what is being said and what is being put out on graphics, because a lot of the stuff I write goes out as graphics as well. So that is, I am that guy who yells at the screen, but the only step forward from that is that, oh, I actually, yeah, Sean, let's use that. Write that one down. Let's put that out. That's the only difference.
Who qualified fifth in Monaco '89?
I think it was it Mansell who was fifth on the grid? Because it was, I think it was an all McLaren front row, and then because Brabham were really high on the grid, so Modena and Brundle.
Look this up.
I can't remember. Maybe Mansell was third on the grid, and Modena was fourth on the grid, and Brundle was fourth on the grid. Sorry,
Brundle was fourth on the grid,
and then maybe Patrese was up there, and Patrese stalled on the formation lap and started.
Oh my god! Yeah, wait. So Senna and Prost were with McLaren. They were 1-2.
Yeah.
Then Jerry
Boutsen. Yeah, I had the wrong Williams. 3. So Mansell must have been fifth, right? Because Brundle would have
Mansell was fifth.
Yeah.
Brundle was fourth.
And then
so you said Mansell. You were right. You were right. Yeah. You were right. It was Mansell. Holy fuck. Holy fuck.
Oh,
by the way, I'm going to do this at least 10 more times. So
I don't think I really, I was like, Matt, we can't just like throw out shit like that. Like,
no, because I heard him on other podcasts.
I
heard him on other podcasts. I was like, I think he's a genius. I think we could just do it. So
I
am blown away.
Okay. I want to provide a caveat to this, and that is that I can't do this for every race. I just fortuitously, you have come up with 2 races that I remember.
No, you're being humble. You're being humble. So if you're 2 for fucking 2 right now.
If you say to me who was fifth on the grid at the 2018 Austrian Grand Prix, you're going to get a blank face. I'm going to say, I can't remember.
Why? But that was just more recent.
Because some of them go in and stick, and some of them do not.
Okay.
Now the two races you mentioned in question, Monza '86 was particularly relevant because there was no front row once they finally got started, and also Teo Fabi was on pole, and it's very unusual that Teo Fabi would be on pole. He only had, I think, 3 in his career.
Of course.
And two of them were back to back, Austria and Italy '86. So it's easy to remember. There's an unusual guy on pole position that weekend. And in '89, that was an unusual race because of where the Brabhams were. The Brabhams were very high on the grid, and Mansell was kind of an interloper. There was only one Ferrari in that race because Gerhard Berger was injured at the previous race at Imola and missed it. So there was only one Ferrari. So that stuff, I'm like, I remember those, so therefore it must have been Mansell,
So guys, we're asking him fucking easy ones, and this guy's an amateur. He's a fucking amateur.
When you watched last year, when you watched the Beyond the Grid, or not Beyond the Grid, what's the Grill the Grid?
Mm-hmm.
And they asked everyone to just name the champions.
Yeah.
And Lando Norris couldn't do behind Lewis Hamilton. Were you just smacking yourself in the head?
No, because drivers aren't paid to know that. It's like asking me, okay, so how do we shave a half second off on the next run? Well, I can't do that. But I'm not paid to do that. Right. What I can do is say, well, if you look historically, there's only 3 laps in the history of this racetrack that have gone inside the time that you're going for. So I could do that, but I can't explain how you do it. So I'm not surprised. Drivers are not paid to know history, and they race. They just race. They're only interested in what they're doing right now and what they're going to be doing next week. What was very unusual was that Sebastian Vettel got them all. That was so impressive to me. Drivers do not know this stuff, and he knew every single one in the right order. That is very unusual. I've never met a driver who could do that before.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you feel a kinship with Vettel when you saw that? Because I was impressed with that as well.
I was highly impressed. Anorak to anorak, geek to geek. I was like, much respect, Sebastian Vettel. You know that stuff.
I was going to ask you how you got into this. That was going to be the first part, but it just doesn't seem like you had much of a fucking choice in the matter. This is just it for you. It seems like you had this obsession and this skill, and you kind of willed it into a career.
More or less. Yeah, that's the too long didn't read version of events. It started as a fan. It started at Brazil '87, the first race of '87. My older brother, was in charge of the television, so I didn't have a choice in what we were watching. And he decided to watch the highlights of the Brazilian Grand Prix, the first race, and I found it fascinating. Shiny cars go fast, which is about as much as you get out of it as a 6-year-old. And then watch the next race, and the next race, and the next race, and here we are 35 and a half years later, I've only missed 2. So,
And did your brother stick with it, or he just kind of dropped it?
he watches it, and is invested in it, but not to the extent that I am. He will watch the races, but he won't analyze what happened in practice or anything like that. And if I asked him who won this race that we watched together 25 years ago, he wouldn't come up with the answer. He wouldn't remember.
And what was it about? Like, was it an instant? Like the second you turned on, you saw this race in Brazil. What was it? What drew you to it immediately?
Was it a particularly good race? I mean, we watched our first race was Baku 2021.
Yeah, and so, it was like that was it. If we had seen
Lewis
Monaco,
left the magic on. Yeah,
right.
If we had seen Monaco, who knows if we'd be here right now doing this podcast?
Right,
but we were just like, it was so amazing. We were like,
I'll give you, by the way, just as a follow up on what you just asked me about the old races, who was where on the grid. I'm having a block in remembering who won that race, because I remember Verstappen crashed, Gasly was on the podium, Vettel was second, and I'm sitting here thinking, and the winner was,
you mean Baku?
Baku.
Yeah.
It was Perez. Yeah,
well, there you go. You see, I just want to say full disclosure that it doesn't always come to me that easily, because there are so many races these days. It all gets bundled in together. So yeah, I do have blocks like that. But yeah, Brazil 87, returning to your question, wasn't a particularly interesting race. I got the 25th anniversary of that race, 2012. The BBC, who I was working for at the time, Mark Wilkin, who was the producer at the BBC, acquiesced to my request. It's sort of my anniversary, my silver jubilee, Mark. Is there any chance you can go down to the vault, send a request to the tape library, and get the original broadcast of Brazil 87? I have not seen it since it aired. And he came up with it. Sure enough, a delivery came through, a DVD. Here is the protection master of Brazil 87. And it had the slate on it and everything, exactly as they would, if they were going to re-air it today, send it out in master control, all that stuff. It had all of that stuff on it. And it was very exciting to watch it. And then I watched the race and I thought, well, that wasn't a very good race, was it? After all that. But it didn't matter in 1987, because it was just like, wow, these are fun cars. Like I like the yellow one, I like the red and white one. At that point, I was unaware that I was talking about Ayrton Senna in a Camel Lotus Honda or Alain Prost in a Marlboro McLaren. That didn't come to me. But over time, you become more and more invested in it, and you kind of the highlights of the race would only be like 35 minutes. So the whole thing, soup to nuts, news, talk about qualifying, the race, interviews, the lot. 35 minutes is your whole show. So there wasn't a lot to digest, and it'd be once every 2 or 3 weeks. So it was kind of like a bit of a treat almost to watch these things. Nowadays, of course, it's like, wow, it's relentless. Every session is broadcast live. It seems like every week we're racing. It wasn't the case back in the 80s and the 90s. We only had 16. We only had 16 races for most of that time. Right. So yeah, I found it naturally interesting. I'm not from a racing family. No one encouraged me to get into it. It was just something I naturally found and never let go of. And as I mentioned, during school, I was kind of distracted from work because I was too busy drawing pictures of Ferraris and McLarens and stuff. And ended up getting into it, blagged my way into it professionally. And then once I was in there, it's like, right, well, you're not getting rid of me now. Now I'm in here.
So what was your entry level position doing? Like, what was your first job working?
It was exactly the job I do today. There's more to it today. I've added other bits to it, but the first time I worked in Formula One was Australia 03 for Speed Channel in the US. And I talked my way in. I didn't know anybody at Speed Channel. I cold called them. And it took me 2.5 days to find the right person, because I didn't have a phone number. I had to call. Firstly, I called Fox Sports in Arizona. My girlfriend from the time was in Arizona. So I called them. Have you got the number for Speed Channel? Certainly. Here's the number. So I called Speed Channel. They put me through to the Speed Channel office in Los Angeles. Now, Speed at the time was owned by Fox. So that's the Fox headquarters was in LA. I call them. Could I speak to the F1 producer, please? You need production. That's in Charlotte. This is this number. Okay, so now I'm calling Charlotte. Could I speak to the F1 producer, please? Certainly. Who's calling? Sean Kelly. as if the person, they're never going to know who I am, but sure, Sean Kelly's calling. Put me through. And they put me through. It goes to voicemail. And I leave a voicemail message that says something along the lines of, "This is your lucky day. What an amazing opportunity this would be for you." I can't remember what I said, but
well, it's giving, like, you see these scenes in movies, right? And it's giving Good Will Hunting vibes. There's this vibe of like, there's this clip that's been going on TikTok, and it's like this guy, and he wants to work at a law office, and the guy's like, "But you haven't gone to a law school," and he goes, "Yes, but I remember information in a way that you've never seen before." And he goes, and then he starts quizzing him, and he just starts rattling it off, and like, I want to write a movie, I want to write a scene about you at this like dinky little before it's on ESPN, but like you being like, "This is your lucky day. I'm the best thing that's ever happened to you."
I'm sure it wouldn't have been quite so arrogant. I would have been slightly more humble in whatever.
That would have been that's our job to make to turn.
It's like it's DiCaprio in Wolf of Wall Street when he goes into Spike Jonze's office and he just starts selling the shit out of these stocks, and everyone's like, who the fuck is this guy?
Yeah. I think what clinched it for me was one of my mundane jobs before being in F1 was I had telemarketed double glazing windows. So I'd learned to cold call people who didn't want the product and sell them the product by the end of the phone call. So I used that to sell me. And Frank Wilson, who was the person who took the call, who was the producer at the time, and is still one of my best friends in the sport, and still somebody, I mean, we still text back and forth, and we're usually annoyed that baseball has come up with some ridiculous stat like this pitcher is only the sixth left-handed pitcher since 1973 to pitch from a 2-out situation with runners in scoring position against a play. It's like there's so many caveats. So he'll text them to me and say, "Look at this bullshit," and I'll be like, "Yes, that is bullshit."
Wow. I love that, because that's a thing that, like, whenever I would watch that growing up, my dad would be like, "And here's another fucking stat," like, who, as if, or it's like, it's especially when they do it, like, it's like the Yankees in this position, like with 2 outs with runner in scoring position, not since 1986. And it's like, yeah, but it's a completely different roster. It actually bears no importance to the moment that's happening right now.
They're just playing for the statistics for the statisticians at this point.
Yes. And I take a firm line on this, and that is, we are not the reason people have tuned in. And we must always remember that. People have tuned in to watch the race, not to have a lecture on mathematics. That is not why we're here. Our job is to complement the broadcast, not take over the broadcast.
Okay, I want to get into this with you. Sorry. Yeah. Go well, because statistics have played a really interesting part in baseball and basketball in terms of the sabermetrics movement. I'm sure you're aware of, where like baseball especially and basketball, with baseball and sabermetrics, they have like WAR, like wins above replacement. Like they can actually break down like how many wins this guy is worth above a replacement level player, or PER in basketball, they have player efficiency rating, right? Or, with Aaron Judge, they have, Aaron Judge on the Yankees could pass Maris, is 60. Like they have these like statistical benchmarks that seem to be really important. That you can really help us compare different players across different eras. And I guess my question is, I don't know if you push back against that. It seems like you do a little bit, or maybe just the more erroneous stats. But I guess my question for you is this, like, with statistics in F1, do you have a sort of challenge with comparing drivers statistically across eras when, like, with the exception of the teammates, all the equipment's different, the regulations are different, and it's harder? Does that make your job harder?
Well, you kind of answered it in the question there by saying the equipment is different, the tracks are different. It's not like baseball or any stick and ball sport where, with the exception of where the home run fences are, most stick and ball sports, whether it be hockey or basketball, you're playing on the same sized field of play.
Right.
You're playing the same game, no matter where you play. In motorsport, that's not the case. So it kind of renders those comparison points null and void. It's not really, it's not a line you can really go down. And also, I always say, look, there's some algorithms you can come up with. You mentioned wins above replacement and stuff like that.
Right.
There would be these sorts of measurements that data scientists could come up with, I'm sure, for Formula One. But I always say that's fantastic. You know, it's fantastic that you've had a wank with your data science. But at the end, when the be all and end all of this is that the viewer is not a data scientist. They're a Formula One fan. So if you tell them, for instance, oh, you know, if let's imagine a hellish dystopia where, you know, there comes like, you know, like there's expected goals in soccer. Let's say there's expected finishing position. You know, Max Verstappen is as an expected finishing position of 1.13. Oh, great. Right. Well, I look forward to seeing him finish 1.13. Don't know what that means, but yeah, well done you for coming up for that. How about we talk about the fact that he's won 5 in a row for the first time in his career, you know, stuff that actually is in English. It's people that actually can palate that and say, wow, I didn't realize he hadn't won 5 in a row before. That's interesting. As opposed to, yeah, but the really interesting thing is his expected finishing position is 1.13. Okay, I don't know what you want me to do with that, but it was nonsense what you just said, but I got the 5 in a row bit. That's what I rebel against. Now I understand it's very important in baseball and so forth, but I have always taken a firm line on this and said we are doing television. It needs to be instantly palatable and instantly understandable. Right. You can't say Max Verstappen is only the 3rd Red Bull driver in the last 15 years to have been this far behind in the championship and then had 5 consecutive race wins. Like, whoa, that's too many caveats. Stop. Shut up. Think about what you're doing before we fire you and come up with something we can understand.
Right.
Sure.
I guess my wish is I almost, maybe I'm just biased, but I guess I wish I had some of those statistics for F1 more, because it's so much harder to compare, because that's just as a fan, you want to compare these guys, and it's so much harder when they're different equipment.
It might be usable in written form. Like if you were reading articles about Formula One. Right. But I do television. Yeah. It needs to be instant. You need to be instantly able to understand what we're talking about in the broadcast. You've only got a few seconds. So it has to be instantly palatable. If you want to go and have do a long read, as they call them these days. Yeah. Here's a breakdown, statistically speaking, of, you know, what Max Verstappen this year cross-references what Alberto Ascari did in 1952. Fine. We would not say that on the air. It's far too heavy.
Yeah.
Sure.
Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Did you ever, what you're speaking to is that like you can look at data points and see the complex variables and whatever, but then like you can make it into a bite-sized form for an audience and for a common viewer. But I mean, within your time, there's so much stats and analyzing of stats like behind the scenes of Formula One. Did you ever have a, thought or feeling like I want to be a person on a team analyzing statistics, analyzing race times, analyzing like tire pressures and all that kind of stuff?
It's sometimes been asked of me. That's that same question. Did you not want to get into that side of things? I always say that the stuff I do is for entertainment purposes. It's not engineering data. You know, right. I am not studying. I do study tire wear and long run stuff and all that, you know, but I don't do it from an engineering perspective. I always do it from the perspective of what will the viewer want to hear about, what can the viewer understand. You know, if we start talking about the nuances of, if a Pirelli engineer started talking about engineering terminology and construction forms and got into the actual minutiae of it, it might get quite a heavy lift in a broadcast. But ultimately, yeah, it's not for engineering. Like if I say to you, our Red Bull have won at this track, Singapore is a good example. You know, Red Bull have, I think, 13 podiums at Singapore, way more than anybody else. So on past form, you would say this is a very Red Bull track, but it doesn't necessarily apply to this year. And what Red Bull would want to know is how our car in 2022 will function around this racetrack. Bearing in mind, we've not raced at this track since 2019. So, you know, the stuff I do has no relevance to what the engineers would want to know. That's a separate department.
Sure.
Who qualified third in the 1993 Australian GP?
Senna was on pole that weekend, so that was the only I think pole position for McLaren in 1993. So Prost must have been alongside him because I think he was on the front row at every race. So it must have been Damon Hill, I guess, third.
Hold please. Hold please.
Is that-
Hold please.
got it, Matt.
1993 Australian Grand Prix qualifying. What I don't even know how to fucking
Qualifying. You said qualifying.
Yeah, no.
so I think it was Senna. I think it was Senna, Prost, Hill, Schumacher. I guess top four.
Okay, let's see. Qualifying. Senna qualifying.
Senna, then Prost, then Hill, and Schumacher in the Bennett.
No, it was Senna, Prost, fucking Damon Hill. You holy
And they finished.
shit.
And they finished in that order in the race. That was the podium in the race as well. That
Okay,
was Senna's last win. by the way.
Okay,
Senna's
all right.
last
So
win.
this is just sorry.
I had
Go
a
ahead,
stat
Brett.
question. So in terms of when thinking about, we've been told about that back in the day, there was that there was not a lot of overtaking.
Right.
And now there's much more overtaking. Like in terms of within stats of the last like 10 years versus like the 10 years beforehand, is there like a percentage jump of like how many overtakes there are per race? Like how much but percentage wise has that increased?
I don't remember off the top of my head the exact numbers, but I can say that as a general trend, there was a marked increase in the number of passes that happened in the 2010s compared with the 2000s. And there are a couple of very prime reasons for that. Firstly, refueling was part of Formula One from 1994 to the end of 2009. And because there was refueling, you would have cars that would start the race on different weights of fuel and so forth. And what would happen was you would hear engineers say, wait for the stops. And, once the guy who's got more fuel, the guy who's got less fuel ducks into the pits, then the car behind try and stay out a bit longer and make up the difference while he's on light fuel so that when he makes his pit stop, he comes out in front. So that would massively affect the amount of overtaking. The reason why they wouldn't attempt to pass before then is because DRS was not a thing until 2011. So at the same time as refueling was banned at the end of 2009, in 2010, we had one season when there was no DRS and there was no refueling. So that was a kind of an anomalous season. It's also the last year that Bridgestone were the tire supplier in F1. There was an instant jump in passes in 2010 because you could no longer, quote unquote, wait for the stops. All the stops, if they all were executed correctly, would all be the same length. When they were in refueling era, you always had the chance that there was different weights involved. And if you had a one-stop strategy, your fuel stop would take longer than somebody who'd taken a two-stop strategy because they have to put more fuel in the car. That all went away. And in 2010, you had to do the passing on the racetrack. That would therefore happen. So you've got to jump in overtaking. Then in 2011, what happened was there was an anomalous race at Canada 2010 when Bridgestone brought a tire that was too soft for the conditions, and it kind of wreaked a bit of havoc with the teams that couldn't handle a soft tire. When Pirelli came in as the control tire supplier in 2011, they were told as a remit, here's your brief, design tires like that go off early. They have to really manage the tires. Pirelli said, okay, sure, we'll do that. At the same time, DRS was introduced to Formula One. And that allowed, as you know today, the car behind has the ability to open the rear wing flap and pass. That caused a big jump in on-track passing, which has sustained to this day. China 2016 had 128 on-track passes, I think, in that race.
Right.
So a big jump in number of on-track passes. It doesn't always work that way, but as by and large, as a trend, comparing 2000 and 2010 is almost it's almost frivolous because the opportunity to overtake on the racetrack is much higher in the DRS era because it's been made easier.
Right.
Why do you think Europeans have such an appetite for boring shit like 0-0 ties, cricket, safety car finishes, whereas like Americans, they just can't abide by something like that?
Right. They wouldn't watch that because it's boring, but they will watch baseball.
Owned. Exactly. Well, baseball has a lot of stops and you can get up. It's not
exactly.
It's Same thing with
Exactly.
football but racing is just this with no overtakes. It's just this relentless drone.
In theory, yes, but the thing is, Americans will sit through stuff that's boring because they'll sit through endless commercial breaks to watch the NFL. That's boring.
Right.
But it's
That's
just
when
a
you go
different-
up
it's
to
a
get more
different
But
type of-
beer.
they spend billions of dollars to try to make it not boring as possible.
Yeah, it's a
So
different.
that you don't even know what anyone's even selling anymore.
You might think of it as being a different style of boredom, but it is still
Right.
they're not. Nothing's happening. They're not playing. Nothing's happening. In soccer and Formula One, if you've got a boring game or a boring race, nothing's happening, but the game is still going on. It's still like, we're getting somewhere. We're getting one step closer to the end of this. This is the most boring thing I've watched. But you know what?
Right.
In 30 minutes time, it will stop and I can go and do something else. So yeah, Americans will watch boring stuff as well. It's a
That's true.
misconception. It's a misconception that the American market is all about instant gratification. It is. American sports fans are no different in that regard to European sports fans. European fans will watch it and think, "My God, that was boring. Thank God that's over." It's
Right.
not. They won't just sit there and watch, bridge rusting. It's not.
But after the Abu Dhabi incident, then we had the Monza safety car ending, and everyone's like, "Yep, that was great. So glad that happened." It's like,
Yeah.
no, that was horrible. That was horrible.
That was the 12th Grand Prix to finish behind the safety car since 1999.
Okay. Yeah, that was, and then Crofty then just says it, and he sounds like a genius, right? That's how that works.
I wonder where he got that stat from.
Right. No, so you just know that off the top of your head, or where do you look this shit up, or do you don't look any of it up? You just know.
I refer you, as I refer everybody, to forex.com, which is the sort of motorsport database. That's your starting point. And that is part of autosport.com. If you have an autosport.com subscription, you get Forex access with it. And that is extremely versatile in terms of what you can do, how you can manipulate numbers and so on. I have my own database as well, which is a little more idiosyncratic for stuff that I can't get done on Forex. Then I also I work with an Italian data scientist called Michele Molino, who actually used to work for Forex as well, and I can say to him, ridiculous requests like that I would never know the answer to, like how often have Red Bull led FP1 without taking pole position in their history?
Yeah, how the fuck do you figure that out?
Yeah, well, that's a database dive that no one's going to know the answer off the top of their head. So I'll say to him, okay, go and do a deep dive on that and find out what the answer is. And he can come back to me and say, okay, well, it was the number was 76 times and here's the complete list.
So when you get the answer, so you have a bunch of broadcasters that you work with from a number of channels and countries. Do you just send them a Slack thing, or how does that work?
Well, Virtual Statman is what I operate. It's basically, they log in.
Right.
And there's a screen in the commentary box, the announce booth.
Yeah.
And it's just me throwing stuff up there. It's just like, it's basically a glorified WhatsApp.
I see.
But it's secured, so we can talk amongst ourselves. And the thing is the French TV, Canal Plus in France are not competing for the same audience as, Viasat in the Netherlands. So if we have this communal meeting place where I can say, look, here's the stats. And one of them might say to me, oh, do you know the last time this happened? And I can throw that up on the screen and they can all see it. So they all say it on the air because it's like, well, Sean says it. So there you go. There's the number.
I have a question. Okay. So let's say a French announcer asks you a question on the Slack and then Crofty asks you a question.
Yeah.
Are you kind of like telling the French guy to go fuck himself for a second because Crofty takes priority, or how does that work?
No, they get I would
first come, first serve
in the order. Well, it depends on the nature of the question. Like if, let's say, the second question is, how many times has the race finished behind the safety car? Okay, here's the number. But if the first question was, could you find out the number of times in history where a driver has been this far ahead in the championship with this many races to go? It's like, okay, that's a more nuanced question. I'm going to answer the second one first because I've got the answer right in front of me. So let's get, they're answered. I don't want to say they're answered in the order that they received. It's more like they're answered in the order that I can get the answers out. Because we're in the middle of live television, and always the question that's being asked will help other networks. So if French TV asks me this question, I'll still put it up on the screen for everybody because they might want to use it as a talking point in their broadcast.
No, have you ever gotten a really obscure stat wrong and you're like, I could correct this, but no one will know it's such an obscure stat? Like there are stats that I hear in this that I'm like, they could be making this the fuck up, and there was no way I would know.
Yes, I just did it 5 minutes ago because I said it was the 12th race finished behind the safety car, when in fact it was the 13th if you include Spa 2021, which wasn't really a race. But strictly speaking, it finished behind the safety car, even though it was just the one lap. So there's a good example. But I thought, I'll let it slide. I'm not going to explain it. But since you have brought it up, yes, there's a good example. That does happen.
Sean, I don't feel like I can trust you anymore. Can I just say that?
Trust me, I'll be having a long look at myself in the mirror after this.
I'm now gonna watch the race exclusively from the Twitch streamers, and Crofty and Brundle cannot be trusted anymore.
There are examples. What I always say is that the audience is more forgiving than you think. And if you say, for instance, let's say for argument's sake, Lance Stroll has been eliminated in Q1 the last 5 races, but actually it's 6 races. A bit like what I just said, it's 13 instead of 12.
Yeah,
People will go, okay, well, we get what you meant. We know where you're going with it.
He's bad. Yeah. What's the difference?
So they'll forgive that. But if you say something like, and Max Verstappen's just broken the all-time record for whatever in a season, and he hasn't. Right. That's a bigger mistake. Don't get that wrong. We'll forgive you we'll forgive you what I call it finger trouble. You got the wrong number. Yeah. But the point stands. I gave you the wrong number.
Sean,
if you say it's a record, if it says a record when it's not a record, that's more of a court-martial offense.
Sean, who's your equivalent in Brundle's ear on the grid walk? Because I feel like maybe you should be doing that too.
When Martin is doing the grid walk, I think he would have our producer, who until the Netherlands was Tim Glass, and also Tommy Hertz, who's the on-site producer. Sky's production is actually produced remotely from West London, it's really quite impressive because we have cameras in the TV compound, so when they're in the office at the track, we can see them and they can see us. I say us. I'm not always, I'm often at the track, but yes, they don't have me in their ear because I couldn't. I mean, they did for the Austrian Grand Prix. I was because I was in West London, so I was able to yell at Crofty and Brundle and Ted.
But I feel like if you were there. Sorry, I feel like if you were in Austin, or was it Miami? I forgot which way, but I feel like if you were there, you'd have been like, don't ask Megan to freestyle. That's a bad idea.
Oh, that. Well, I'll tell you how that came about.
That's not Patrick Mahomes either. I
tell you, the Megan Thee Stallion thing, the reason that happens is because I know exactly what happened with Martin here. It is, hey, Martin, Megan Thee Stallion's right behind you. She's a really successful rapper.
Right.
Martin's not going to know.
Of course.
Person,
Of course.
So, like, you want me to interview this person? I know nothing about this person other than what you've just said. She's a rapper. Okay. Can you? I don't know. Can you do a rap for us now? Is that a thing?
Yeah.
Because that's like, I'm on live television. What do you want me to say? I don't know anything about the person. So that's what he came up with. And the thing is she was perfectly pleasant, and all of her flunkies were, acting like the big I ams, which, I took umbrage to, because I just thought, oh, who are you? Like, and you were invited onto the grid, which most fans would give, at least one limb to do.
Right.
And then you start bossing around the people who work on the grid, which, is what I took offense to. Megan Thee Stallion seemed perfectly agreeable.
It was her PR guy.
Yeah, it was somehow misconstrued.
Trying to earn his keep.
It was somehow misconstrued as this attack on Megan Thee Stallion and the idea that rappers don't belong on the grid. I don't have a problem with that. I get celebrities. It's all part of the glitz and glamour of Formula One, and it is, whether people want to admit it or not, part of the appeal. But it was the thing is like, look, all your handlers acting like your security guards, get out of our way. You get out of our way. You're on the grid. It's a working environment.
Right.
Yeah.
We need like a just like a TikTok celebrity fan who has the same type of statistical knowledge that you have about Monza 1983 to be like, that is SoundCloud artist.
Yeah, we did have it in one instance, Singapore, around like 2007. I remember Peter Windsor was our pit lane guy, and Shilpa Shetty was on the grid, who's a very famous Bollywood actress who I recognized, but no one else in our American-led broadcast team knew who she was. So that's my one instance where I came in handy. There was another instance, actually, that same race that year, Patrick Dempsey was on the grid, and Patrick Dempsey came up to Peter. Peter didn't go to him. Patrick came to him, and he was
That's how it should be.
Peter Windsor, Speed Channel, great, awesome, yeah, I love you. I watch you every week, and we did an interview with Patrick Dempsey, and of course, Patrick Dempsey's massive. He's a racer himself. He was all about talking about fuel strategies and tire wear, and can Lewis do this? And he was getting really involved. And I was like, wow, he really is all in on this. And I remember Peter at the end of the interview when we cut back to the main broadcast. Peter said off mic, said, I didn't know who that was. Who was it? But he didn't want to stop him because he was in full flow and he was talking a lot of really interesting stuff. It was like, wow, that was a really great interview. I'm afraid I don't know who it was. So that does happen. And I do feel great sympathy for pit reporters who have to go on the grid and have those things happen, because it is not as easy as it looks.
Oh, definitely. And I will say that, some people have had their thoughts about Brundle, but doing the grid walk. And I mean, he's even talked about it as well, being like, I don't know this. I don't particularly enjoy this, but as newer fans, there's something there's something that's so specific and unique and like special and amazing about someone like Brundle, that it's not like a celebrity person, someone that like is there to know about celebrities. There's something about it. There's something about Formula One as a newer person that it's the culture of it is so different than it is in other sports. And there's something about it that's so delicious to me as a viewer to watch, like Brundle talk to someone who he clearly does not know anything the fuck about. It's like so much better to me that he's talking to, whoever, Patty the Batty or Stormzy or whoever, that he's like, I don't know what the fuck, but here you are. It's just, I just love it. I love it. And I hope it doesn't change.
Also, the other thing is like, everything about Formula One is so pristine and packaged and glossy. And it's just, there's this one part in the beginning of every race where we just see this little man just fucking bumbling around, stumbling around, like kind of tripping over people. Like he's trying to avoid, everyone's kind of telling him to fuck off. It's like the least professional. It's the beginning of the show and it's the most unprofessional part of it. And he's so quick. And Serena Williams, you want to talk to me? Oh, okay, I'll just go fuck myself. Anyway, moving on. And it's just like, it's just this very guerrilla. It's weirdly this guerrilla style man on the street part of this $1 billion industry. It's incredible.
Well, I'm like Martin. I mean, it does nothing for me. But that just because it does nothing for me doesn't mean. I've had this conversation a lot about Drive to Survive. It doesn't mean that if I don't get anything out of it, but if everybody else does, that's great too. There's a lot of gatekeeping that goes on in F1, particularly in this Drive to Survive era, between like the older fans who seem to think, well, these new fans, they know nothing. Well, hang on a minute. You were a new fan once. What did you know when you were a new fan? How did you get to be here for 35 years? Because once upon a time you were a new fan and you didn't know what you were talking about. So, enough with this nonsense. Like I've said many times, if I graded fans on how much they know about the sport, a bit like, what's the term? Mansplaining. Like when a woman says, oh, I'm a race fan. Oh, really? Name 3 Grand Prix drivers. Yeah. Like if I did that with every fan and, I said, well, who's on the front row for Monza 1986? None of you would be F1 fans. You would all be excluded. I've decided, no, none of you, you're not qualified. Sorry, you're not real F1 fans. So at some point, You have to say, this is nonsense. You don't need to have a statistical encyclopedia brain to be an F1 fan. Hey, you know what? If you like Megan Thee Stallion, hooray, you're an F1 fan. You know what? If you like Martin Brundle doing grid walk, hooray, you're an F1 fan. You're interested in what rear wing settings the Red Bull team's got this weekend, hooray, you're a fan. Hey, you really like the fact that there's 3 races in Las Vegas in the US next year, hooray, you're a fan. You know what? If you really don't like the fact that there's 3 races in North America next year in the US, hooray, you're still a fan. The fact that you care, that's the bit that makes you a fan. There isn't an exam that you have to take that decides whether or not you are a Formula One fan.
Sean, have you ever been in a bar and a guy has been like mansplaining, talking about how much he knows about Formula One, and then you go all Matt Damon on him, and then you start saying, then you'll be talking about Gordon Wood, and like, and then it's like, and then he realizes you know 1,000 times more than he does. And then you go,
and then you like steal, apples? Then you steal his girl, then you steal his girl. You see him later hey, and you say, how you like them apples?
I got a number. How you like them apples?
And then your friend goes, my boy's bloody smart, isn't he?
My boy's wicked smart.
Yeah, you know, British.
I haven't had an instance quite like that. No. Secretly, I think everyone in F1 secretly wants to have that moment. They want to say, actually, you're wrong. Oh, really? What do you know? Well, yeah, you kind of secretly want that moment. But I have had it in reverse in a sense that I was at Catalonia, the Spanish Grand Prix this year, and I was sort of sat incognito at a table with a lot of guests, and there was a woman sat explaining things to her family, and I was listening, and I thought, wow, she really knows what she's talking about. Like everything she says exactly right, and like she knows the finer details here. She doesn't just know the general things. She's like really knows what she's talking about. And at the end, then. After that, I went on the stage, at which point my identity was sort of revealed, Scooby-Doo style. Oh, you're the, wow. And you just sat here silently listening for the last 20 minutes. Her father came to me after that and said, thank you for not interrupting her, because she usually, the biggest thing when she talks about Formula One is that guys interrupt her. And I said, well, I didn't have to interrupt her. She clearly knew what she was talking about. I had nothing further to add. She covered everything. So I have had that when I've had, not times when I've intervened, but times when I've actually shut up because I've respected, like, this person really knows what they're talking about. There's no need for me to add. She's got it. She's got this covered.
We struggle with that restraint.
It's like in Mean Girls where she's getting tutored by the guy that she's way smarter than. He's like, I think then you carry the 4, and she's like, wrong. He's so wrong.
Okay, so in terms of we are newer fans. In terms of beefing up our statistical knowledge, we have a few theories and feelings. One of our shticks is our feelings don't care about your facts. Okay, sometimes something feels right, but then people remind you that it's not right, and you're like, but that's not how it feels. So it's like, so like the main thing, it feels like, and we're recent fans, but we know about Schumacher, we know about the history. We've done some research on the history, but this notion that Ferrari's the greatest team in Formula One, and they've been in the sport the longest. But there is this pushback because we talk a lot of smack about Ferrari, and then we get people in our comments being like, second is still really good, blah blah blah, and they want to kind of like cherry pick these statistics when we say, well, if it feels like if you zoom out, actually Ferrari sucks.
Yeah, exactly.
So, do you have any statistics that can help provide a rebuttal to these people who don't like what we're saying about Ferrari?
Well, I mean, Ferrari haven't won the driver's title since 07.
Where they barely won. They
tripped into that. Yeah.
Well, scoreboard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they did have to rely on McLaren kind of eating each other.
Yeah.
Yes. And in 08, of course, 08, they got so close to winning the driver's title. Within 30 seconds of winning the driver's title. and then Hamilton passed Timo Glock famously, but they did win the constructors title that year. There's been countless other near misses. You know, Alonso went into 2010. I think Alonso was the championship leader going into the last race, and Vettel won the title. You know, Alonso took it to the last race in 2012. And going back further, you know, 1974, Niki Lauda was on pole 9 times that season. That was his first season at Ferrari. And it wasn't even in championship contention by the end. You know, clearly the fastest guy in Formula One in 74 wasn't in title contention. His teammate Clay Regazzoni went into the last round with the chance to win the title, and he didn't win it. He didn't win it. Emerson Fittipaldi won it in a McLaren. So there are many examples of Ferrari being there or thereabouts, and some of them more tragic than others. In 1970, Jochen Rindt won the championship posthumously in a Lotus, and Jackie Ickx in the Ferrari was the only person who could catch him in the championship after he died at Monza. And Jackie Ickx failed to win at Watkins Glen, and that sealed the title for Jochen Rindt posthumously. So there are more sort of downcast examples of Ferrari in a near miss to win the title.
So that's what this year feels. I mean, that's what this year feels like in terms of, you're talking about Niki Lauda getting pole 9 times. I mean, you know, yes. Leclerc's had so many poles this year and hasn't been able to, you know. Yes,
Leclerc has had more poles for Ferrari in a single season than any other driver other than Lauda and Schumacher. Yeah, it is somewhat similar to that.
So would you say, Sean, that although Ferrari has won the most championships, would it be safe to say statistically they've also lost the most championships?
Yes. Yeah, it wouldn't be a stretch to say that, but again, it's longevity creates that statistic as much as anything. There are long periods. I would refer you particularly to the early 90s when they went 4 years without a win, where Ferrari were kind of the punchline to a joke. 1992, for instance, was a terrible year. And there's been 3 years in the history of the World Championship where Ferrari have not led a lap. 1973, 1992, and 2020. 2020 was a terrible year. They were 6th in the World Championship. It was the worst since 1980. So it is very unlike Ferrari to be hopelessly uncompetitive. But that has also happened down the years. And they've had winless seasons. You know, as recently as 2016, they didn't win a race. They were very competitive that year, but they didn't win a race. In 2020 and 2021, well, in 2020, they didn't win a race and never looked like winning a race. In 2021, they had a couple of pole positions. You know, Leclerc nearly won Silverstone, but they were more competitive. But yeah, then there were other years like 92 when they just looked absolutely all over the shop.
But if you had a stat, I'm not saying you do, but if you had a stat for wins to dollars or just the most bang for your buck, considering how much money they spend, they got to be one of the worst teams. Like in terms of return on investment.
Well, I mean, you say that, but I mean, they've got the most drivers' titles and the most constructors' titles. So,
but they also spend easily the most money.
They perhaps do, but also, you know, Ferrari exists to go racing. Enzo Ferrari founded that organization to go racing. And selling cars was just a way of raising money to go racing. So it is in the DNA. They exist for that purpose. They don't exist to, you know, create, you know, control electronics like McLaren or batteries like Williams. They don't have any other side industry. That, you know, the primary purpose of Ferrari is to go racing. So, you know, however much money they spend, I mean, good luck to them. Fine. I mean, there are other examples of teams spending more money, or at least as much as Ferrari, and failing. The most egregious example being Toyota in the first decade of the 2000s. They were in Formula One from 2002 to 2009. At some point, they were rumored to be spending $500 million a year for 2 cars, and yet never won a race. So, you know, Ferrari can say, hand on heart, well, we did a much better job than they did.
Yeah, Jenny, go ahead and cut that part where Toyota made it look less, made my point look less good. Cool.
Sorry. I'm simply arguing that they're terrible. Yes, Ferrari are terrible.
There we go.
Terrible in 1980. They were terrible. They'd won the title in 79. They were so terrible. Imagine this situation. They won the championship in 79. In 1980, they were so bad that Jody Scheckter, who was a reigning world champion, failed to qualify at the Canadian Grand Prix. Gilles Villeneuve and the other car was only 22nd on the grid. That's how crap they were in 1980. So they do have examples of being really, really bad. And 2020 is a good example.
Now I know if I had a time machine where I'd go so I could just jerk off constantly. I would just take a time machine to 1980 and just watch that.
But I think even more so. I'd rather watch them. It's more entertaining to watch them fumble the ball at the
That's true.
I mean, that's what it feels like. That's what feels crazy is that like there's this level where like they have all the stuff and then they're fumbling the ball. Like they're running into the touchdown. You see that in football sometimes. They'll be running into the touchdown and like kind of gloating and they'll fumble the ball before they even get into the end zone. Mm-hmm. And they'll be like celebrating and then but that's what this year feels like.
The thing is this sort of stuff is also part of Ferrari's DNA, an unwanted side product, because I mean it always used to be big politics at Ferrari. John Surtees complained about it in the 60s even, how, the big politics at Ferrari would influence what Enzo Ferrari would hear. Because Enzo Ferrari famously would never go to the racetrack. The only time he would ever go to the racetrack would be on Fridays at Monza. He'd never actually be there to watch the cars race. So he would get reports back from the trenches, so to speak, and they might be politically motivated. There's an agenda there. Like they might say, oh, such and such isn't doing his job properly, when in fact, it might be that the person who's reporting back actually wants that guy's job and he's hoping that Enzo will fire him so he can have the job, that sort of thing. And the chassis department's blaming the engine department, and all this is all stuff that's happened in Ferrari's
history. Why did Enzo not go to the track?
I don't remember.
Psychological reason?
I don't remember the exact reason, but he was famously inscrutable. Of course, he always wore those dark glasses, so you could never see his facial expression, what he was looking at, that sort of stuff. I don't remember. I mean, it was always sort of accepted that Enzo's never here except on Fridays at Monza.
Okay, so Brian and I are going to start another conversation between the two of us, me and Brian, and then you're going to interrupt us to support that argument with a statistic, and then we're going to steal that statistic from you, like Brundle and Crofty and half the other broadcasters in the world. Okay, cool.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Brian, I've been saying this for a long time. Alpine, they're looking for a replacement to pair against Ocon. And I don't know why they signed Ocon for that long, because to me, I don't know. I wish I had the statistical wherewithal to understand this, but it just feels to me like he's like so overrated and not a good driver. And from what limited races that I've watched, it just seems like he loses to every teammate and shouldn't be in the sport anymore. And just, I don't get why they signed him to that long deal.
An interesting point, Matt. I mean, I believe he's lost to every single teammate that he's ever gone against, other than maybe Fernando Alonso this year. But we'll see how that even shakes out.
I just wish I had a statistical. Is that true? I just wish.
Is this where I come in?
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, yes, you are right that Ocon tends to be beaten by teammates over the course of a championship season. That's simply a statement of fact. That's not even a controversial statement. But he does have a great turn of speed. I mean, he outqualified Perez 15-6 in 2018 when they were teammates at Force India. This year, he's beating Fernando Alonso in the championship. He has had great results because he has had a race victory. There's a little bit of a tailwind attached to it, of course, because half the field went out at the first corner. But a win's a win. Same with Sakir 2020 when he was on the podium. He's had some great qualifying performances, notably in the wet. He was third on the grid at Monza 2017. What Ocon does bring, and this is not to be sniffed at for a team like Alpine, is tremendous consistency. I mean, the guy finished, I think, the first 34 Grand Prix of his career without a retirement. He does not retire from many Grand Prix, and usually he clocks up the points. And when you're in a position like Alpine, you're fighting for 4th, 5th in the championship, you need to make sure that at least one of your drivers is in the points every week. And that's why Ocon is ahead of Alonso in the championship. Alonso's probably had the more attention-grabbing moments, being in the front row in Montreal and third on the grid in wherever it was, Spa. It was Spa. I can't remember. Sorry. Oh, the humanity. When you go to all these races, they all mix in together. I can't possibly remember which one was which. Yes. So perhaps he isn't as attention grabbing as Alonso. He's also, Alonso's a much trickier operator when it comes to politics, and jumping ship to Aston Martin is a good example of that.
Hell yeah.
But Ocon has always had tremendous consistency in his career. If you think back to 2015 in GP3, he won the championship that year. He only won, I think, one race that year. It was the first weekend of the season in Catalonia. And he won the championship because he had nine consecutive races, 9 in a row, where he finished second. 9 consecutive second place finishes. Now, that's a sort of consistency that wins you championships. So, you might say Ocon, maybe he's not the fastest driver you've ever seen in the world ever. But if you're trying to get 4th in the world championship away from McLaren, he's a good bet. So that's why you might put Ocon in that car. But in keeping with your claim, that might be a reason why you wouldn't want him as Max Verstappen's replacement at Red Bull, because he'd be a good Max Verstappen's teammate at Red Bull, but he might not be the guy you want as the number 1.
All right, so just cut that middle part, Jenny, and then just
like that was a really well spoken thing that unfortunately only Matt and I will ever hear.
Okay.
I even convinced myself. I talked myself into it.
It's what most good podcasters, they take both sides of things, and we're just like, no, just one side, please.
When was the last time that Fernando Alonso was beaten by his teammate?
I'd have to look that up.
Would that have been Hamilton?
Been never.
Alonso was beaten by Hamilton in 07. They were tied.
They tied, but they were tied in points. Yeah. Let me add my statistical analysis to this, which is really just emotions, but they feel like stats. Here are the facts: is that Alonso had blackmailed his team, and they fucking despised him. And at that point, we're probably Sean. They were probably 100% behind Hamilton at that point. So the fact that it was that close is probably a testament to Fernando's greatness as a driver, because they were
true. It is true that he was, because Mark Priestley talked about this last week about how he was handing out envelopes full of cash, which is very unusual. But as I said to you before, Alonso is a snake in the grass when it comes to this stuff. And it's quite well known. The way he ended up at McLaren, the Brazilian Grand Prix of 05, he finished 3rd in that race to clinch the title for Renault. Montoya won the race in the McLaren. Ron Dennis went up onto the podium to collect the winner's trophy, and a conversation ensued, which led to Alonso signing for McLaren for 07. So at that moment, when he won the championship for Renault, he was already thinking about his next move, and I'm out of here.
Days off. 0 days off.
Alonso has a long rap sheet when it comes to this sort of stuff. It just comes with the territory for him.
I just wish there was some statistic that backed up my claim that he should have way more championships, and that when you actually dig into it, that his 2 championships doesn't really reflect his greatness. I wish there were statistics to back that up.
Well, yeah. You are right that he's been 3 times a runner-up. He could have been, certainly he could have been a 5-time champion if the wind had changed direction, because he did win in 05 and 06. He lost at the last round in 07, lost at the last round in 2010, lost at the last round in 2012. So, but for the
what happened in 2010? So he was going in leading to that when he lost.
If I remember correctly, he was the leader going into the last round.
Wow.
And that was the only season. That was the year we had 4 drivers who could win at the last round. Vettel, Webber, Hamilton, and Alonso could all win the championship. It was the only time it's ever happened. And it was at Abu Dhabi, and Alonso was called in early, I think. From memory, I'm not 100%. Alonso was called in early by Ferrari. He then came out behind Vitaly Petrov's Renault and could not get past Petrov. And I think Alonso was like 7th or something like that. And meanwhile, Vettel was leading for Red Bull. And I think Alonso needed to be 5th to be champion and never got past Petrov. And so Vettel won the race and it cost Alonso the championship. And Vettel ended up winning that championship. And I would say, by the way, Vettel was worth the championship. I mean, he looked like the fastest driver to me in 2010, but he'd had a lot of bad luck. Vettel had not led the championship in his career until that day. He became the champion on the same day that he led the championship for the first time. That was the first time that had happened since 1976 when James Hunt did it.
Very nice. It must have been very nice for Sebastian Vettel. Anyway, moving on. Don't want to dwell on that for too long. Who is the worst driver statistically that's had any sort of run?
Worst driver statistically. Well, there are ways.
Not the one-offs. You know, any sort of career.
Yeah, I mean, I'd point you to like Al Pease, the Canadian driver who raced at Mosport in 1969. He was black flagged because he was too slow. He literally disqualified for being too slow. There are other drivers. I mean, Pierre Ginzani, a favorite of mine on Twitter. I always try and bring up Pierre Ginzani because he's an obscure Italian driver from the 1982. I remember failed to qualify. I think he must have failed to qualify far more often than he ever actually got into the race. And in his entire career, scored 2 points. And he was in Formula One for from 81 to 89. It was the entire length of the 1980s and scored 2 points in his career. So that's another example. Then you've got drivers who had most starts without scoring a point at all. You might look at Luca Badoa, who I think is the record holder there, who's done more than 50 Grand Prix, 51, I think it is. Never scored a point, but he raced in an era where there was only points down to 6th place. So, you know, if he'd raced in today's era, he definitely would have a point. And Ginzani would have more points as well. It's perhaps easier to look at really bad constructors as well.
Sure.
And I point you to HRT and Caterham, or Lotus/Caterham, the One Malaysia entrance from 2010 through 2014, who never scored a point, but points were awarded down to 10th place. So you're literally saying they never got a top 10. There are other teams that were considered bad, like Osella and AGS, who raced in the 80s, but they got in the top 10 at a time when you didn't get points outside the top 6. So you could say that they actually were better. They had better results than did Caterham and Lotus. But I would caveat that by saying we are in the most reliable era in Grand Prix history. Cars don't break down anymore. So the chances of picking up those points because other cars break down is also lower than it has ever been.
Okay, speaking of cars breaking down, there's this infamous Monaco race when in the last like 2 laps, like 7 cars, it started raining and cars started going off. And I've watched it on YouTube like multiple times because it's just the craziest ending of a race I've ever seen. I'm assuming you know which race
This is the 1982 race.
Yeah. Yes, I believe. And Prost was in they were all, it was just like cars broke down. A car broke down in the tunnel. One guy went off and then 3 cars ahead of him, they're like, oh my God, he's going to win. And then like those cars started breaking down. Like the last 5 laps were like the craziest thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yes, it's a well-known race in history because of those final couple of laps. So basically, Alain Prost had led the majority of the race. Rémi Arnoux had led early on in the Renault and then spun out of the swimming pool, and that put Prost into the lead. Prost was controlling the race, and had it stayed completely dry, Prost was going to win that race. And it started to drizzle with rain, just enough. You know, it wasn't wet enough for wet tires, but there was just a dampening. Prost crashed at the old chicane. The old chicane was very fast. It was not like the one that's there now. That put Patrese into the lead.
Right, yeah, Patrese.
Riccardo Patrese took the lead. On the next lap, Patrese spun at the hairpin, which you now know is the Fairmont hairpin. It's called the Lowe's hairpin back then. And partly that was because he spun on oil. For years, he thought he'd spun because it was raining. Derek Daly's Williams had broken its gearbox oil cooler and was dumping oil onto the racetrack. And it turns out, and Riccardo only found this out recently, that he'd spun on Derek's oil. He thought he'd spun on water. Anyway, so Patrese spins the hairpin. Didier Pironi takes the lead in the Ferrari. Pironi, all he has to do is get to the finish without running out of fuel. but he's driving a turbocharged Ferrari, which uses a lot more fuel than normally aspirated Brabham and Lotus and so on. So start the last lap. If you watch that race, Pironi's going very slow, ponderously slow going into the last lap because he knows he's running out of fuel. He's like, I've got to just creep around and get to the end without running out of fuel. He gets as far as the tunnel on the last lap, runs out of fuel. Andrea De Cesaris, who's in Alfa Romeo, from memory, I can't remember if he would have won the race if he kept going, but he was in contention and he ran out of fuel and earlier in the lap. So from the TV coverage you see Pironi stopped in the tunnel, the race leader stopped out of fuel. Then we cut to De Cesaris, also out of fuel. And we end up with a situation where, okay, Patrese, who's now recovered and thought he'd lost the race, now takes the lead of the race. But we've got all these cars scattered all over the racetrack. And also Derek Daly's Williams, which I said was leaking gearbox oil because he'd had a hit up the back. They'd lost the rear wing. His car stops on the racetrack as well. So we've got all these cars scattered across the track. And James Hunt utters the immortal line. Well, we're sitting here waiting for a winner to come across the line, and we don't appear to be getting one. Patrese gathers it all up, finishes the lap, crosses the line, takes the win. That's Riccardo Patrese's first Grand Prix win. Pironi is second, out of fuel. De Cesaris is third, out of fuel. They didn't finish the race, but they were classified second and third because they'd already started the last lap. Patrese comes through.
Why does that count? You don't finish the race.
It's very simple.
Bullshit.
It's very simple. Basically, they started the last lap. So they'd finished, I forget what it was, the 80 laps. I forget how long the Monaco Grand Prix was in 1982. Let's say for argument's sake, let's say it's 80 laps for argument's sake. So they finished lap 79, start lap 80. The cars behind them are a lap down. So they've only finished lap 78. So you see? So then Patrese comes through to complete lap 80 and wins the race. The Lotuses of Nigel Mansell and Elio De Angelis come round and they're only just completing lap 79. But the checkered flag's out, the race is over. So you've just completed lap 79. Well, Pironi and De Cesaris had completed lap 79 2 minutes earlier. So they are second and third. They haven't passed them for position.
They don't just let every car finish?
No, you've already
see that on the thing that like the checkered flag will go for the people that have been like lapped before, right? Isn't that what happens?
Yes, when the checkered flag is shown, the race is over when you cross the line. The end. That's absolute. There's no.
But when like Max Verstappen crosses the line, they still have other guys coming through. It's not, the race isn't over.
Yeah, but they might be a lap behind, but they're still in that place.
Yes,
let's
say for argument's sake, the driver who's in second place stops on the last lap, right? And other cars go past him. Well, he's still going to be the first guy one lap down, you see, because he completed the second to last lap before all those other guys.
Oh, I see.
In terms of absolute time. So he's still ahead of them. So if, let's say everybody's lapped from fifth place down, and the guy in second place stops on the last lap, he would be classified fifth because he completed that lap before all the other guys crossed the finish line. So that's how that works. So no, you don't have to cross the line, but there is a cutoff, and you have to complete 90% of the classified race distance. So if you, let's say it's 80 laps long, you cannot be more than 8 laps behind,
right?
Or else you are not classified as a finisher of the race. You have not completed enough distance to be classified as a finisher, and you would not get points if there was only like 3 guys finished the race, and you're the guy who did the first, would be fourth, but you didn't do 90% of the race distance. You don't score any points.
I see. And do we just see that happen less because the cars are closer together now?
It's because of reliability.
I see.
It started in 2003 when Parc Fermé regulations were implemented after qualifying. So there was no longer a case of after qualifying, cars would go back into the garages, they'd take the engine and gearbox off, build it up again for the race. So a lot more unreliability back then. Then in 04 and onwards, there was regulations to make sure that the engine had to last 1 weekend or 2 weekends, and the gearbox accordingly as well. So therefore, you built this multiple race reliability into the cars that was not there previously, when the car only had to do 1 race distance. So they would push it a lot more, and you get a lot more retirements. So if you look at the all-time list of races where no one has failed to finish, where you got every starter finish the Grand Prix. Well, the first time and the only time that happened before 2005 was the 1961 Dutch Grand Prix. That's still the only race in history where there was no retirements and no pit stops, which makes it a highly unusual race. From 2005 onwards, there's been more than, I think, a dozen races where everybody has finished the race. It was inconceivable that that would happen prior to this multiple race engine and gearbox stuff. And also park from A after qualifying, can't touch the car. So you can't just take everything off and build it up again. And of course, every time you do that, you're introducing the possibility of human error. You haven't put it together properly.
Right.
So that's where that reliability has come from.
Okay, so I have some. So let's talk about some drivers I think that are maybe in the mix in the news. Maybe you have some insight into them. Yuki Tsunoda just got re-signed.
Yes.
Can you explain him to me? What's going on with him? Because I hear your boys on the news saying that he's fast, but then he makes a mistake. What's going on with him? Well, explain Yuki Tsunoda to me.
Well, he scored points on his Grand Prix debut, which everyone made a big song and dance about.
Right.
I personally never jump on that bandwagon. There are many drivers who have scored points on their Grand Prix debut who, essentially sunk without trace. I don't want to be disrespectful to someone because some of them are very talented drivers. But, Pedro De La Rosa scored points on his Grand Prix debut. Tonio Liuzzi scored points on his Grand Prix debut. Arturo Merzario scored on his Grand Prix debut. That doesn't necessarily mean, so basically hand him the world championship. But it's still a nice thing to be able to say. Nonetheless, when Tsunoda came into F1, I wasn't fully convinced. And it's fair to say he was put in his place by Pierre Gasly in the first year together. His second season, I struggled to tell whether Gasly's having more difficulty with the new regulations and the new car, but he's been much closer to Tsunoda has been much closer to Gasly than was the case in 2021. And I think part of the reason they want to keep Tsunoda is some continuity with the driver lineup, because if you're going to have a new car, a new driver, what you don't want in Formula One generally is have two new drivers at the same time, because then you've got no continuity carryover from the development of the previous cars. Because if you put two new drivers in the car and you've got a new car, you haven't got anybody to say it's different from the old car in this sense. It's maybe change this. They like to keep some continuity. So if Gasly's on his way to Alpine to link up with his best buddy in the world, Esteban Ocon, then Tsunoda would be a logical choice to keep at AlphaTauri.
Okay. Let's. I want to have a little bit of fun.
You're not having fun now?
This has all been fun.
It's all been fun.
This has all been very fun, but my brain's starting to hurt because my sponge is small.
I'm sorry to hear that. I wouldn't put that on your Tinder profile.
What's your what's like your favorite statistic? What's if you're at like a dinner party or you're talking to F1 people, what's one that you pull out? You're like, did you know like this one?
Rest assured, and I want everyone listening to this podcast to know, I do not sit at dinner parties and talk about F1 statistics. Unless
you're forced to.
Unless I'm sitting with somebody who wants to know them.
Right.
If I am asked about them.
If Martin Brundle comes up to you on the grid and says, "Hey, Sean Kelly, give me a stat."
In that instance,
Virtual Statman, hey, make a stat for me now, hey.
Right. In that instance, I could probably come up with stuff. My favorite statistic. Well, I mean, a lot of them are personally influenced. A good example being when Michael Schumacher won in Montreal in 2004. And Peter Windsor was doing the unilateral, which was the top three, in the interview, the top three, which goes out to every broadcaster. That's why we call it unilateral. And he said to me, have you got anything I can open to Michael with? Because that year, Michael was dominating. I mean, he won 13 races that year. Have you got anything new I could open to Michael with? And I said, well, look, he's about to win here for the 7th time. No one's ever won at a racetrack 7 times, ever, in Formula One. It'd be probably a first. Schumacher was never interested in statistics historically. So Peter Windsor, if you watch that unilateral, Peter opens with that stat. Michael, I don't know if you're aware, you're the first driver ever to win at the same track 7 times in their career. And to my surprise and delight, Michael said, "Oh wow, that's cool. I didn't know that. Yeah, that's really cool." He didn't realize it, but he kind of given me a career help at that point. I was like, "You see that? See, Michael Schumacher, he's really interested in what I have to say." Basically, I said to say that to him. And actually, my all-time favorite statistic comes from my first season in 2003. Again, a race won by Schumacher, and that was Monza of 03. Before the race, I had calculated that it was possible we could get an all-time record for the fastest race in history. That record had stood since 1971. Peter Gethin in the BRM had won at Monza 151 something. And I had sat down and worked out before the race the exact time to the thousandth of a second that the race had to be quicker than for the all-time average speed record to be broken. As Schumacher crossed the line in that race, they displayed the heat winner, race time and everything. Fastest race in history. Straight away, it was like, let's put this on the air. This is on Speed Channel only. I was only working for Speed Channel. So before Schumacher hit Parc Fermé, we were saying, we have just witnessed the fastest Grand Prix in history. Gethin's 32-year record is gone. Schumacher now the owner of the record. And I thought, Gethin, that's planning, perfect planning. And for the rest of the day, no one else reported it at all. And bearing in mind it's my first season, the doubt starts to creep in. Like, have I balls this up? Have I got this massively wrong? No one else is saying it except us. And that evening I wrote and sent an email to the entire production staff, including our on-air talent, saying, look guys, I have done this calculation 12 times. I've done it forward. I've gone from the average time. I've gone from the average speed. Every which way arrives at the same answer. This is the record. But no one else is saying it's a record, and I'm worried that I might have screwed you over completely.
This is like the Post with the fucking
right.
Like whether you run the fucking Pentagon Papers story or not.
This is like 8 p.m. that night, and I'm like, look, guys, it's been great knowing you.
Yeah.
And I've really
you
enjoyed.
got a bottle of whiskey and a fucking hand.
I've really enjoyed my one season in Formula One, but I might be wrong here, and I might have just screwed up the broadcast. Now I got some emails back saying, "Oh, now you tell us." Like, I'll go. That makes me feel even better. And then the next morning, I woke up, and lo and behold, the greater Formula One media had said, "Oh, by the way, yesterday's race was the fastest Grand Prix in history." And at that point, of course, the cigars are out. I'm like, "Yeah, right. we beat everybody else by 24 hours." At the next race,
never doubted it for a second.
Never in doubt. The next race, and at the next race, coincidentally, was Indianapolis, and we were on site. That was the first time I was ever on site for a Grand Prix, and literally, I was invited to work on site for that race. The first night we get there, go to St. Elmo's, that famous steakhouse in Indianapolis, sit down. Jean Todt and Ross Brawn are at the next table, and there's drivers in the bar and all that. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I thought I was going to get sacked 2 weeks ago, and now I'm here. I'm like in the crucible of Formula One. Like everybody who's everybody in Formula One's in this bar, and I'm here. What happened? Like, less than 12 months ago, I was bullshitting my way on the phone just to get a job, and now look at this. Yeah, that was the launch pad. That was the launch pad.
But you said Monza was the fastest race 24 hours before anyone else. So you fucking belonged.
Right. It felt like, see, I told you I knew what I was talking about. I landed that shit. No one else in here knew that. Not even Ferrari knew about it.
Well, that makes sense. That checks out.
So that's when people ask me what's your favorite, that would have to be it, because you have to understand now, not to be too high-handed about it. I'm kind of used to this. I'm 20 seasons into it, and I'm used to I've done some work for Formula One teams on their media departments. I've done stuff for F1 themselves. I work for F1 themselves. And now I stand on a stage and talk to thousands of guests at the track. I'm used to it. But back then, I was a 23-year-old kid trying to feel like he's blagging his way in. So to get that and be like, wow, like I had that before the rest of you. Everyone in this room you didn't know, and I had it. So that was a very self-congratulatory moment, for which I apologize for bringing that up. But that was definitely the moment. I was like, wow, I'm on to something here. I could be here. This could be the rest of my life. So, and here we are.
That's amazing.
So, who got it fourth in the? Who qualified fourth in Montreal in 1998?
In '98. Well, I think Coulthard and Hakkinen were on the front row. I think there was an all McLaren front row. I think Coulthard was on pole. Fourth,
Coulthard was Coulthard.
Wait! Don't fucking help him! Don't.
Oh,
sorry.
You said fourth. You said fourth, right?
I said fourth. You said fourth.
Sorry.
On that basis, I'd say third would be Schumacher and fourth Jacques Villeneuve.
Wait, so Coulthard was pole.
Coulthard, Hakkinen, Schumacher,
Fisichella, Schumacher, Villeneuve. Damn.
So Fisichella was fourth on the grid.
Yeah, dude. Oh, look at the time. I'm sorry, we have to go.
Fisichella and Villeneuve. Was Villeneuve fifth
on the grid? Dude, that's so embarrassing for you.
Yeah. Was Villeneuve fifth on the grid?
Villeneuve was sixth, dude. Come on. It was Ralph Schumacher. Ralph Schumacher was fourth.
And wait,
I don't know if we can even air this episode now.
Was that the race when Schumacher didn't move at the start? Like the lights went
I don't know.
out
You're supposed to be the one that you can tell me that.
I seem to remember Ralph Schumacher's car never moved from the lights. At
the start of the race, Ralph Schumacher started brilliantly, and it sounds like I'm reading this from Wikipedia, but I actually know it by heart. At the start of the race, Sean, Michael Schumacher started brilliantly and overtook Mika Hakkinen, whilst his brother Ralph Schumacher stalled. It took 2 attempts to get the race started as Alexander Wurz precipitated a collision, which somersaulted his Benetton above the gravel trap into his first turn and involving John Alesi and Jarno Trulli as well. This carnage brought out the red flag, of course. The race was stopped and Alesi, Wurz, and Trulli all took the restart in their they had spare cars, which I always knew. And Herbert was lucky that his mechanics were able to repair his Sauber as Alesi took the spare. The only damage to the car proved to be a bent suspension arm. At the second start.
They used to have spare cars before the Parc Fermé regulations of 03.
Oh, wow.
That's right, Sean. That's right. At the second start, Michael Schumacher's Ferrari got a poor start and was instantly overtaken by Giancarlo Fisichella.
Even when he's reading it, he's fucking correct. You can't even read the fucking names. You're an embarrassment. I'm embarrassed to be hosting a podcast with you. Sean, if you would like to, if whatever you want to come on, even though you might hate us after this.
Fisichella finished. Wait, how did they finish though? Let me give you a chance.
It was Schumacher, Fisichella. God, who was third in that race? Oh boy, who was third in that race? Jeez, must have been Eddie Irvine, maybe.
Yes, fuck, you redeemed yourself. Yes.
Wow.
Sean,
we'll let you end on that. Absolutely dunking. This has been the fact I wasn't sure what we're like, he's a stat man, but I'm like, come on, we can't just throw shit out like that. But the fact that you have this encyclopedia knowledge in your brain it's amazing. And We really appreciate you coming on our
thank you
for all your smarts. We really appreciate you coming on this stupid podcast.
Wasting your fucking intelligence on us.
I want you to remember me when you are doing the official Formula One podcast years ahead, and be like, "Well, Sean was on our show when we were just doing it at the start."
It's some dystopia.
Yeah.
And you're going to be feeding us stats and we're going to be misreading it. So physical finished on pole.
I've had that from talent on the air when I've given them a stat and they've completely messed up the pronunciation of my driver's name. That's happened.
Right. But Crofty and Brundle would never, because they're legends, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, contemporary drivers, they know, but it's always like if you hand them one that says, okay, so this is, I'm sorry, what's this guy's name? I've never heard this guy.
When you're at the pub with Crofty, does he just sound, does he make everything sound that fun, aesthetic?
Does he wax poetic in the same way, just in casual conversation?
Well, I mean, obviously he speaks with the same voice, and it probably,
I don't know. Maybe he has a completely different voice. I don't know.
No, he's secretly Italian. And I like to out and the way they go. No, he obviously is the same voice. And I mean, I don't think about it. I probably it's more jarring to other people, I'm sure, because they'll hear the voice and they'll turn around and be like, "Hey, that sounds like Crofty." Oh, it is Crofty.
Right.
So yeah, that's probably more like that for everybody else. But there isn't. They don't sound. Crofty sounds the same, more or less, off the air as he does on the air, and that's not always the case. I mean, Lee Diffie, who's a tremendous broadcaster, you might know him from doing IndyCar coverage on NBC.
We do not watch.
You should tune in. IndyCar's fantastic. Yeah, so Lee Diffie, one of the best in the business, did F1, all the races on F1 on NBC, and he has a tremendously high octane delivery on the air. Very, very, now watch this sort of thing, very exciting. But when you speak to him normal, he just talks with a normal voice. And he has that great grandiose delivery, sort of builds up to it on the air, and he really gives it to him, So there's it's all idiosyncratic, some announcers have a particular style that they can only do on the air.
Yeah.
And then some it's a little bit more conversational, a little bit closer to how they would normally speak. So it's it works for them in each case.
So it's not a Gilbert Gottfried situation. Got it. I thought maybe he'd be very low energy or something, but all right.
No, he doesn't have some ridiculous. He doesn't speak like an octave higher when he's off the air.
Okay.
No, he doesn't speak like a duck or anything like that.
He doesn't narrate your dinner. It's like, and lights out and away we go. We're tearing into our first course, and it's dribbling out of Sean's mouth. It's out of his mouth.
Right.
Go down the road too.
Do you know what? I'm sure for 10 grand he'd be happy to do it.
All right, we'll start raising our funds now for our future generations.
Please do. Yeah, get Crofty to commentate on dinner.
Thank you so much for coming on the pod, Sean. We typically end this podcast. We started with "Hello Vankas," which is inspired by Gunther Steiner, because we say we started looking like rock stars. Now we look like a bunch of Vankas. So would you privilege us with a goodbye, Vankas?
Well, I want to say goodbye because I don't know what you want me to say at the end, but I thought you were fucking rock stars, but you're all fucking wankers. So.
Yes! Killer!
Wow!
Where can people, before we go, where can people find you? Where can people see all your stuff?
You can find me on all good social media and some bad social media at Virtual Statman. I'm the actual Statman. My online account is at Virtual Statman. And if you are going to a Grand Prix and you buy an F1 Experiences ticket package, you might just have me as your host in the Champions Club on paddock tours, pit lane tours, or live on the grid. If you're going to the US Grand Prix, I'm sure a lot of you will be. Thursday night live on the grid, I'll be part of that along with a Formula One driver and most likely Burn My Land of the safety car driver. So enjoy. I apologize in advance if I stat you to death on Thursday.
Oh, and thanks for those for comping us. Those that was really nice of you, Sean.
It's pleasure. I had my people speak with your people.
I really appreciate that.
Fantastic.
We'll see you. We'll see you in the paddock in Austin. Okay.
All right.
Okay, Venkas. Until next time.
Goodbye, Venkas.